who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God. Some people will be surprised when you look at the passage, and if you just read it quickly, you're going to think, oh, it's something about, and especially for the single people in the audience, and I know that's most of you. Well, that doesn't really apply to me. That's about married people. So I guess I can put it on cruise control, take a snooze for the rest of the... No, this passage isn't about marriage. If you want to take a nap, well, go ahead. But the passage isn't about marriage. In fact, the whole marriage thing is just an analogy. It's just a figurative illustration to try to prove a point, to try to demonstrate a point. We'll get to the point. Let's explore the illustration just briefly. I think most of you know Michael that's here. He's married to this lady named Lily. Perhaps you've seen her around. And Michael and Lily are a lovely couple. They live just across the street from us. They're some of our best friends in Edmonton. You know how proximity kind of does that. Absence, they say, makes the heart grow fondest. I find that absence makes the heart grow fungus. You know, just when your friends are far away, it's hard to stay connected. We have all these ways of staying connected, but it seems to be tougher now to stay connected to distant friends than it was when I was younger. And for me, my best friends are always the ones that are close by, because then the people I see, I actually talk to them because I'm reminded to, because I see them all the time. The people I don't see, I don't think of near as much as I ought to. And while I value their relationships, it's hard to maintain for a long period of time. Well, let's imagine that Michael is back here. You know how Michael is. I mean, he's a go-getter. So he's back here in the community garden. He's weeding. And he's not just weeding his plot. He's weeding the neighbor's plots, because that's how Michael is. He's digging up weeds in all the neighbor's plots back here. And terrorists from the Free Estonia movement, you may not know that Estonia is a region in a country in Eastern Europe. And it longs to be free. You know, they paint Easter eggs sort of like the Ukraine, but they're slightly different. And they do folk dances sort of like Lithuanians, but slightly different. And Estonia has always longed to be free, to express these desires, to paint eggs the way they think they should be painted, and to dance folk dances the way they think they should be danced. And if you meet an Estonian, you'll also quickly find out that they long to spell words with a K, and then a B, and then a P, and then an R, and then another P, and then a K, and then another B, and then the first vowel, usually an A. They long to have the freedom to do all of this and to make these unpronounceable words. And so they decide that they're going to take over the Lilliput daycare. They're going to raid it and take it hostage, because they've come to believe that Lilliput, little daycare right here in the plaza right next to the church, is the most important site to take hold of in the city of Edmonton. And then Edmonton, of course, is the most important city in Canada. And then Canada is the most important country to make their statement. And so the Estonian freedom fighters take over Lilliput. But Michael's right there. And you know how Michael is. He's not going to stand for that. He's a man of action. And so up he gets, out of the weeds and off his hands and knees, brushes the dirt off his knees, and goes to kick some butt. And he goes and he takes down all the Estonian freedom fighters. He chops Suey's one guy, and he porterhouse kicks another, and before you know it, they're all laying out, right? They're just down. They're down for the count. Every one of them out cold. And he's like, all right, back to those weeds. And he turns to go, and one of them, the cowards, comes to his senses just long enough to squeeze off one shot, shoots him in the back. Terrible. And down he goes. And while he saved all the children and weeded all the garden, he dies that day. This is where you should cry. Well, years later, Lily's helping out at the Make Tax Time Paid Clinic. That's basically all she does now, because now that Michael's gone, she doesn't really have a purpose for living, and so she just volunteers at the church all the time. She's at the Make Tax Time Paid Clinic, and she meets this immigrant, a new arrival to Canada, who doesn't know how to do his Canadian taxes, and so she helps him prepare his taxes, and as a thank you, he takes her out for dinner, and one thing leads to another, and a decade later, it takes her a long time to get over Michael. I mean, the guy's a hero. And a garden. What else could you want? But a decade later, they realize that they're in love. They've been hanging out all the time. so it was a very clear example that they would have seen all the time. Unlike the story I just told, they wouldn't have waited a decade. Most of them, like I said, would have got remarried really quickly. And because the mortality rate was much higher in the ancient world, it's something that his audience would have seen all the time, but he's not talking about marriage. He's just using a common example from everyday life to explain to them a concept. And here's the concept. The law doesn't apply to you. You're dead. The law doesn't apply to you. You're dead. Let me give you another example. If you were dead and you were in your stainless steel coffin, I know that that's what you're going to pick. And it was gleaming and shiny, and you were riding in the hearse from the funeral. It was very well attended, by the way. Lots of important people were there, don't worry. And they were all crying very sincerely. You were on your way from the funeral to the cemetery to be put in the ground, and the hearse lost control on a patch of ice. And the coffin flew out the back of the hearse and slid across the street and smashed through a store window. Do you think you'd be charged with breaking and entering? No, because you're dead. Dead people don't commit crimes. Never, ever has any dead person been charged with a crime in the country of Canada. The law doesn't apply because you're dead. That's what Paul's trying to say. He's using this example of marriage, but he's trying to say a very clear point. The law doesn't apply to you because you're dead. You might say, wait a second. Jason, I don't think I'm dead. Yes, you are. To the law, you're dead. Put to death on the cross with Jesus. That's what it says here. And that's what Paul's trying to say. He's not trying to talk about that. You know, when it comes to the law, it seems to me like there's two types of Christians. There's two camps in the current evangelical church that I've experienced, and I'm old. I've been traveling around the evangelical church most of my life. I've been experiencing it most of my life, and I'm over 40. Old, ancient. And in that experience, what I've seen is that there's two camps in evangelical Christianity when it comes to the law. And they're both wrong. The heartbreaking thing is the majority of people find themselves in one place or the other, and they're both wrong. There's those who would still have us follow the law. They're like, look at all this good stuff in the Old Testament. There's like hundreds of pages of great stuff back here. We ignore it far too often. Let's rediscover some of the great truths of that. I'm all for reading the Old Testament, but the way they read it is not the way that I read it. They go looking for things that Christians should be doing. And they slowly build up a list, and it's lists of things from the law. The law was a gift from God for the Jewish people. It's not a bad thing in and of itself, but when you read through Romans, it becomes very clear. And Romans 7:1-4 couldn't make it any clearer. The law doesn't apply to you because you're dead to that law. But they want to reapply it. And they come up with little things. They start to call Sunday the Christian Sabbath. Or they become Seventh-day Adventist and they start hanging out together on Saturdays instead of Sundays. There is no such thing as the Christian Sabbath. We have no day where Christians are imposed upon them a day of rest. It doesn't exist. But you hear that in churches all the time. Sunday's the Christian Sabbath. In my hometown, there were two types of farmers, according to most of the church people that I grew up with. There were the good farmers, and you knew who they were because they didn't drive their tractors on Sundays. And there were the bad farmers, and you knew who they were because when you drove past their field on Sundays, their tractors were out in the field. And some of the bad farmers went to church every Sunday, had a loving wife and kids who they were supporting. They paid their taxes. They like I said, they attended church every Sunday morning, every Sunday afternoon if the weather was nice like today. They were out in the field. Some of the bad farmers, not only did they not drive their tractors on Sundays, or some of the good farmers rather, not only did they not drive their tractors on Sundays, but wants to rebuild the law. And they find little bits and pieces of the Old Testament law and they say, follow this, follow that. You've heard it all your lives. You're in a Baptist church. You've heard sermons about these topics. Every single issue. In the New Testament, one of the key issues was circumcision. And in the letter to the Galatians, Paul says, if you let yourself be circumcised, you will be cut off from Christ. I don't know if you know what circumcision is, but if you don't, ask your mom when you get home. But that's a graphic thing to say when you're talking about circumcision. He says, I hope those who are unsettling you, when he's talking about the circumcision people, I hope they castrate themselves. He says, I hope they slit with the knife and castrate themselves. That's pretty graphic, and it's pretty out there. I mean, that's a pretty out there kind of. What is Paul so worked up about? Paul knew that the law was dead for Christians. But I told you there were two camps. There are those that are trying to recapture the law. They're trying to refigure out what part of the law applies to Christians. What part of the law are the parts that we have to follow. But then there's those who say, oh, wait a second. Did he say the law doesn't apply to us? We're free to do whatever we want. We're free to do whatever we want. We can party all the time. The law doesn't apply to us. There's no Christian Sabbath. We never have to go to church again if we don't want to. There's no standard for exactly how much money we give to the church. We don't have to give anything. I'm going to keep it all for myself. I'm buying a new car. $75, I heard they're selling. No, that's not true. Here's why they're wrong. There's one little part, and then see, when you get to verse 4, likewise, my brothers, you also have died to the law through the body of Christ. Just like the woman whose husband is dead, the law does not apply to you at all. So that you may belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead. You see, the purpose of Jesus dying on the cross, the purpose of him fulfilling the requirement of the law, as it's going to say in Romans chapter 8, the purpose of him accomplishing all of this on our behalf was not so that we could have extra parties. It was not so that we could have extra money. It was not so that we could be happy and carefree. All of that is a byproduct, but that's not the primary purpose. When you read through Romans carefully, what you get is this. Before the work of Christ on the cross, we were slaves. Slaves to sin. I don't know if you like the Matrix series of movies as much as I do, but I love it. Before he takes the pill, he's a slave. He doesn't fully know it. He doesn't fully understand it, but he's a slave. He's a battery in a power plant. He's a slave. Before we come into our relationship with Christ, and before Christ's work on the cross for all of humanity, we were all slaves. Slaves to sin. Slaves to trying to follow the law, to trying to please God, but always falling short. But he didn't die so that we could be free. He died so that we could be his. We're not just set free, we're bought. The Bible again and again uses the image of us being purchased, of us being indentured servants, of us being bonded, bond slaves, it says again and again in Scripture. The word bond servant, that is somebody that is bought with a price and is attached to a master, is used to describe the Christian again and again and again. It's not that we're set free to do whatever we want. We're set free from our slavery to sin so that we can belong to Jesus, so that we can belong to Christ, so that we can be servants of Christ. So, does the law? Absolutely not. Not one part of it. God doesn't want 10% of your money. He wants all of it. Every percent of your money. God doesn't want your after that stuff. Look at their lives. Look at how happy and free they stay. They're happy for a moment, and then they're chasing after the new thing, the next thing. And they're not free either. But I don't believe that Jesus died on the cross, that he came to set us free from the law so that we could be whatever we wanted to be and be wherever we wanted to be, whenever we wanted to be, however we wanted to be. I believe he died to make us his, so that we would serve him with our everything, not with 10%, not with one day a week, with everything we have, God. What did Jesus say? The one commandment left was? The one thing of the law that's left. He said, all the law and the prophets, they're all summed up in this one saying. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And the second thing that's so equal to the first, love your neighbor like you love yourself. You can't do that and be free in the way the world says. You can't do that and be free in the way the world says. You can't do that and be free in the way the world says. You cannot love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You cannot love your neighbor as much as you love yourself and be free in the way the world says. You can't. But you can do that and be extremely happy. You can do that and look like you're more free than anyone they've ever met. You meet somebody that really is into loving God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving their neighbor like they love themselves. You meet that person, when you meet those people, and I've met a few of those people, when you meet those people, you don't think, wow, what a bummer. Dude's really tied up in all his legalistic religious duties. Man, glad I'm not like him. Or her. The overwhelming experience you is, man, does that ever look good? They are so happy. They're so, and they don't seem to be tied to anything. Romans 7:1-4 isn't about marriage. It's about the fact that you're dead to the law. But being dead to the law doesn't mean you're completely free to do anything you want. No, it sets you free so that you can be fully in love with Christ. So that you can be fully serving Jesus. Something you can never do as long as you're worried about the law. When you look at the life of Jesus, he broke the minutia of the law all the time. The Pharisees were all the time on, wait. Article 32, subsection C, subparagraph little i's, number 2, states that you're not supposed to pick grain on the Sabbath. We saw you, as you were walking through the field, you were taking a snack. We saw you do it.